Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Fish to the Virtual Art here. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite 3 baits to use for catfishing. And before we get started into the baits themselves, I would like to take a moment to talk about the gear you typically would use for catfishing, including the rod, the reel, the line, what rigs you should use, what size hooks you should use, what types of hooks you should use. And without further ado, let's get into it. So first off, starting with a rod, I would typically pick anyone from a medium heavy to heavy. Of course, I'm not doing all the big river fishermen like they do out there in like Mississippi or whatever. In Oregon, for us, it's gonna be the Snake River. I'm just in the metro area for Columbia and Willamette. Typically, you don't get that big of a catfish. If you could catch something like 3-4 pounds, that's like considered very impressive. We really don't get that much big catfish out here, and most of the catfishing we're doing or I'm doing is in smaller ponds and lakes. And for these, medium and medium heavy will suffice. Rod length, nothing really special. Anywhere from 6 foot to 7 foot, or even longer a little bit if you wanna. It all works. And as in for the type of reel you're using, anything works. Also, conventional spin casts like the kiddie reels where you have a button and press down, and just good old spinning reels, they all work. They are all perfect. So for line, I want to talk about this because the line really differs from your fishing situation. Typically, I would say anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds will work, but if you're in clearer water or like the fish are finicky, I would downgrade it to a 6-pound line. But most of the time, 10 to 20, 15, anywhere in between 12, it all works. Because the biggest catfish you're gonna see like in these lakes and ponds, I would say if you're seeing something 3-4 pounds, that's like probably the biggest you're gonna get around here. So with 3-4 pounds, a 10-20 pound line will absolutely suffice, and you don't have anything to be worried about. As for rig setup, you of course can always go with a traditional Carolina rig, and this works pretty well. Just have a little weight here. You could do anywhere from a ½ ounce, a 1/4 ounce. Unless you're creek fishing, then you could even use split shot if you want to. But the idea is the same. You have a weight higher up on the line, a leader, all the way leading to a hook. And for hook, you have several options. You could go very small, like size 8. You could go slightly bigger at size 12, size 2. And this is I think a 3/0 circle hook. Anywhere from this would work, depending on what bait you would use, which we would talk about later. So like for smaller baits, you would use a size 8, or if there's smaller fish in general, like there's smaller catfish. If you know there are bigger catfishing there and you're gonna be using bigger bait, go with a size 3/0 or 4/0. Circle hook, straight shank, it doesn't really matter. Of course, circle hook is always preferred, but I know smaller circle hooks are kind of hard to come by. So straight shank also works. Just be careful. It's gonna be a little bit tougher on setting the line. Setting the line is easier with circle hook because you don't really even have to set the line, because the circle hook, the circle part curls around the lips of a fish, so they already get hooked. You just have to reel them in. Straight shanks, you have to watch the line carefully and set the line, so there's also that. Leaders, I like to use swivels. There's swivels with these clips attached to them, and there's also swivels with none, which I happen to ran out of. Of course, both will work. These with the clips onto them, it's more convenient because you could have these looped, pre-tied leaders that you could use and then just clip on instead of having to retie everything. And in terms of leader material, I typically like to use slightly lighter mono or fluorocarbon. Because they're quite like invisible. Really, with a leader, all you want is for it not to be as obvious. And fluoro, I've worked pretty well with 12-pound fluoro because I use a setup also with carp. I don't like to go too light. I don't want to switch switch rods all the time, switch setup all the time. So I use a 12-pound fluoro, and catfish don't seem to mind that. For mono though, I would go something like 10 and below, but I wouldn't go below 6 because some of these catfish will they'll dive into the rocks and curl around structures, and you really don't want that line to be so thin that it's just gonna break. All right. So that's one rig you could use. The other rig, or really it's just a hook you could use, is a jig head hook. And this may come as a surprise or not for some of you guys. And it's just simply tie a piece of worm. It doesn't have to be a big piece of worm. Maybe from here all the way to here. Leave a little wriggle room here on a jig head and just drop the jig head down. That's the most convenient way. You just tie it on a hook, right? And just jig it from the bottom, because what's gonna happen is this: if you jig it, the worm and the curly tail will swirl, and at the bottom, the catfish will actually go bite for it. I've caught a lot of bullheads this way, and one of my friends last summer, he caught a 1 pound bullhead, which is pretty impressive for bullheads. Just jigging this way, and in fact, that bullhead was so big and the chomping power so strong that just right after we got it up, like it broke the hook, like it broke the whole jig head. So this is a very effective way also to approach catfishing with jig heads. First one up is corn. The cheaper, the better. So with corn, all right, corn is a pretty consistent bait. And it's pretty also exclusive too. While it catches panfish sometimes, it's mainly a carp bait, but catfish seems to love it for some reason. Probably because of the sweetness too that the catfish also enjoys. And for these, I would just like pick up a size 8 or even size 2 straight shank hook. Just like how you would rig it for carp. Just like put 1 to 2 kernels onto it. Of course, chumming is not legal in Oregon, but in your state, if chumming is legal, just chum like maybe a little bit out of it. Also, the corn water, you could also dump a little bit of that in. And that just attracts the catfish from all over the place to it. Of course, it's going to be a little bit tougher with a couple of like, you know, just 1 or 2 kernels of corn. But if you get some of the buddies to come along and you got a couple people, like half a dozen line sitting in the water, it also kind of works that way. It's kind of like group chumming. I don't know. I'm just trying to find loopholes in the Oregon state law, which is kind of dumb. I don't know why they don't allow you to chum. I don't know. Ask the state legislators, but so with corn, again, I would just put this on a straight Carolina rig, and I'm just gonna toss it out, wait for a couple minutes, and the action is just nonstop as I'll roll the clip here. Like that was last summer. I was using corn and a combination of corn and worms, and the action is just nonstop. Second best bait, good old worms. The length of it doesn't really matter as long as it fits on the hook and it's not too small that, you know, it's just difficult to put on the hook. It's fine. Now for worms, several things. So first of all, the worms in your yard are pretty inconsistent. There's big ones, there's small ones. All right, as I just said, as long as it fits on the hook and it's not so small that it's just not gonna like even like you can't even rig it onto the hook, then it's fine. The catfish don't seem to really mind this. Perch, on the other hand, seems to really like the big worms for some reason. I don't know. Of course, you could go to Walmart, pick up like $5 for I don't know what, a dozen night crawlers. That's a pretty good deal because these night crawlers, if you use them catfish, don't like just use one because catfish aren't that picky. Like for perch, you probably have to use at least half to like for wriggle movement and perch to bite. But for catfish, you really just need a little bit part. As long as you cover the shank of a hook and a little bit, just a tiny bit left over that it could wriggle, it's fine. Catfish will come for it. They aren't as picky as other fish. And worm you could throw on both a Carolina rig and also a jig head. And these are very versatile, all right? For jig head, most of the time I've seen me catch stuff on, catch bullheads. But also, potentially, also, if you're jigging it in a middle water column, you can also use them to catch crappie or bluegills and all the other sunfish. For a Carolina rig, toss a worm out, you can really catch anything, especially if you're fishing in a more diverse location with a lot of species. That worm is going to catch a lot of stuff. Last but not least, in my opinion, the best catfish bait of all time, cut bait or live bait if your state allows it. But since we're in Oregon, it's only dead fish. Now, the thing I like about the cut bait is that it's really exclusive. It's really just catfish exclusive. Bullheads and channel cats love these cut baits. Well, other fish don't really. Of course, bass, potentially, they could also bite it, but it's really just from what I've seen, from what I experienced, cut bait is very catfish exclusive. And for cut bait, I typically like to chop them, as you've seen here with this cut bait. It's like about a 4-inch. This was a warmouth that got good hooked, so I just brought him home and threw him in a freezer. So I would chop him in 3 ways. I would do one on the head, just like below the shoulder. The second one would be a midsection, and then last one you end with a tail. So personally, I like the head the most because you got all the guts carried around it, and that just gives off a lot of scent. But the middle section and tail section isn't bad at all, and these are guaranteed to catch big catfish, right? Last summer we fished a lake with bait. These cut baits just catch absolutely giant bullhead, and it's crazy because I've used this because most of the time I have corn in my worm, so I wouldn't use cut bait. And cut bait I have to it's hard to come by because bigger panfish, first of all, if they are not gut hooked, I wouldn't really just use them for bait. Typically all of my cut bait comes from like fish I can't release, so I don't, and they're too small to eat, so I make them cut bait. So I don't use cut bait all that often. But the 2 times I've used them throughout the summer, one was a perch and the other one was a bluegill. All right. The 2 times I used them summer, both of the bullheads were about weren't 10-inch plus and around a pound or so. And these bullheads were just absolutely massive and aggressive, right? They would take a bait and they would go. And for these, you might have to wait for a while before they start messing with your bait because they're so big. And what happens is a lot of the smaller catfish would come over and they start tearing it a little. But once you see that line, just the rod tip just goes straight bent down, doesn't come up, it probably means a big one's got it, and then all you gotta do is just reel it up, and you got yourself a big catfish. So that's it today. Thank you for watching. No uploads next week, but we will be back the week after. Please subscribe, like, and share. Fish Live Freshwater out.